A family business under attack.
He pulls out this gun and he goes to load it.
I was petrified.
It could have set that place on fire easily.
But they aren't having it.
I just jumped on him.
I threw a flying knee.
A family fights to protect their store and each other.
And later, a pair of bold thieves.
Get out! He's trying to steal the cop car.
And a shocking attempt to escape.
Jumped the curb and ran right into this cemetery.
This driver thought he could ram through anything. It's really scary.
February 2nd, 2017. Elmwood Park, New Jersey. A clerk at a family-operated smoke shop is taking care of a final customer before closing.
We were only open for 3 months. It was February, and I remember it was like really warm for that day. And this guy comes in. He has a sweater, a coat, something else on top of that. He has a scully, a hat, and he has gloves on. He walks in, he doesn't take off his gloves, so automatically I'm like, okay, wait, something's not right here. He's just walking around, looking at everything. He's like touching everything, putting it back. We had a sign. It's from a movie. It says, if you plan on shoplifting, please let us know, thanks. So he happened to read the sign, and he was like, I could rob this place if I wanted to.
Only Jasmine and her mother are in the store, so they called Jasmine's brother John to ask for help.
I didn't think that they were in danger. My mom was like, this guy's acting weird at the shop. Could you just come and, hang out with us until we close? Because it was, an hour away from closing. So I was like, sure. I just grabbed my dog, jumped in the car, and showed up to give them support.
It took my brother about 5 minutes to get there. When my brother walked in, he noticed my brother's dog.
I said hello to him, and he only noticed the dog. He was excited to, pet the dog, and my dog, his name is Desmond, he just recoiled away from him, which I've never seen him do that, and I haven't seen him do it since. So I was like, okay, that was a little bit weird.
I was like, something's not right. And I have really bad anxiety, so he set my anxiety off right away. Me and my mom were real nervous.
I immediately go behind the counter. I join my sister. Typically, when somebody is acting a little bit off, what I've learned is the best thing to do, especially with theft, is to just kind of interact with them, talk to them about products, and just kind of get a feel for what's up, where their mind is at.
He was in his own world.
I was asking him if there anything I could help him with. Do you have any questions? He didn't respond at all. We had a special energy drink that we were promoting on the counter, so we had a sample can there.
He just grabbed it, popped it open, and drank it.
He starts drinking it, not saying a word to me, which definitely rubbed me the wrong way. It's just a very disrespectful thing to do. So I asked him, are you planning on paying for it? This is not how this works.
He kept acting like he was looking for a credit card or something. And then my brother's like, all right, you have to leave. He wasn't gonna pay for the drink he drank. That's when my brother turned to my mom and was like, call the cops.
And that's when things get scary.
The next thing I know, he pulls out this bright orange flare gun. He puts it on the counter. He opens it up. He pulls, some sort of cartridge out of his jacket, and he goes to load it. And you can actually see me step back and kind of give a gesture, come on, man, is this what we're doing here? And from there, honestly, it is all a complete blur.
A flare gun can be very dangerous. It fires an incendiary projectile, a burning projectile. Even though it's not designed as a weapon, it can be used as a weapon. It could inflict serious injury or death.
I was petrified when he pulled out the flare gun and he went to load the gun. He was like, all right, if you're gonna call the cops, we're gonna do it this way then. It was just a scary thought to know that my brother was now facing that.
Once he goes to load it, I stop his hand. My hands went directly to the flare gun. I actually go for the cartridge and the gun. I went in with both hands. It was completely just reaction and instinct, just to try to prevent him from doing this, because it was my one opportunity to stop this before it got bad.
This is frightening. At such close range, a flare from the robber's gun could hit John or Jasmine, and it could ignite an entire wall of flammable products located behind the counter.
If he were to fire that flare gun in that direction at all, it could have set that place on fire easily.
The robber threatens to shoot John in the face, And that's when Jasmine decides she's had enough.
It was just like a game changer. I just ran around the counter, just pure adrenaline.
While their mother frantically calls the police.
911.
And John tries to get the gun away from the robber, Jasmine suddenly makes a bold move.
I just jumped on him, trying to put him in a headlock. At that time, it was protect my family, protect my brother, protect my mom, protect the shop. You know, that's all I could think about.
You know, out of the corner of my eyes, you know, a blur of blue, and next thing I know, my sister is just on top of him. She jumps on his back, grabs a hold of his neck. That completely distracts him. I get a hold of the flare gun. Because up until that point, we're kind of going back and forth. He's swinging at me. I'm just trying to get it out of his hands. And then once she jumps on his back, that's when he finally lets go. And I have possession of the flare gun.
But Jasmine has no formal training in self-defense, and her brother fears she's in danger.
He's wrestling with my sister, so, you know, I have to get him off first. I threw a flying knee. I'm obviously not a fighter, I'm a small guy. I was not thinking in that moment, I need to get this guy off of my sister. I leap into the air and I try to throw my knee into his stomach.
The robber collapses under the pressure.
He just like threw his body forward and I went flying over. And at that point, that's when my brother had him, grabbed him, and they were kind of tussling. I got back up, they were headed back in my direction, so I just like grabbed a hold of him too.
He's not throwing hands, he's just resisting.
Terrified, their mother runs over to see what she can do.
My mother comes out from the back office. I turn around and tell her, like, go get help. Because, you know, this is a big, strong guy. We're just trying to get a hold of this man and just drag him out of the store in any way that we can.
It was hard. He just kept grabbing onto the wall. He grabbed onto our alarm system.
I'm yelling at him to just leave, get out of my shop. And he's like, okay, I'll leave. I just need to go grab my stuff.
We're like, no, you're not getting anything back. And then he kept like pleading with us, please let me get my backpack and my flare gun. And we were like, no. So my brother was like, look, how about this? If you step outside, I will get it for you. He wasn't really gonna get it for him. So he was like, all right.
I was never going to give him his gun back. My plan was to lock the door behind him and wait for cops to arrive.
And luckily, just as the robber is inching out the door, police do show up.
2 patrol cars pull up and 4 cops come out of the car, almost like out of a movie. We yell, that's him, and he immediately starts resisting arrest. It took all 4 policemen to actually, you know, get a hold of him, take him to the ground, and handcuff him.
Authorities charged 33-year-old Gabriel Velez of Fort Lee, New Jersey with robbery, possession of a weapon for unlawful purposes, and resisting arrest. And the video caught on the shop's security cameras of the family taking him down soon goes viral.
A family fights to protect their store and each other.
A man threatened to hold up the store owners by pulling out a flare gun at the counter.
He kept repeating, you know, that he had a gun and he can rob us.
It was crazy. It felt like every time somebody came in was like, oh, hey, you're that shop? Like, I saw your video online and you guys are awesome. You know, and then that's a whole conversation. Anytime somebody brings it up, it's just like, yeah, I just get really shy and I kind of try to change the subject. I didn't think it was going to be such a big deal.
The reaction is mostly like, wow, you guys handled that great. Your sister is a monster. I would never want to mess with her.
But the Vegas are just glad they survived.
Could have turned out a lot worse than what it did. I felt relieved. I felt happy that everyone was safe.
We are unarmed. We were wholly unprepared for this situation.
It's very dangerous to confront a violent criminal. Unlike what you see on scripted TV shows, real fights are usually a hysterical mess.
In hindsight, the smart thing to do in that situation is to just call the cops immediately and let them handle it. It probably should have never escalated to that point. I'm proud of my family and how we handled it, but I do consider us lucky to have gotten out of that situation the way that we did. I've definitely gotten a few pointers from cousins and uncles who know how to fight a bit.
After the robbery, the Vegas add new security measures.
we realized that we needed to be more prepared. So we set up a panic button right by our counter. This way, if anything like that happens again, we just, hit the silent alarm, the cops arrive and handle it, instead of us putting ourselves in danger in that way.
Ironically, the part in the video that grabs the most attention, the Vegas dog. During the ordeal, Desmond barks, but never emerges from behind the counter.
Keep one eye on the frightened family dog. Seems he's too scared to jump into the fray.
What has gotten the most attention out of anything else is how my dog reacts, or I guess didn't react. I should probably, get a better protection dog, because my little lab just kind of sat behind the counter and didn't do much there.
How is a dog supposed to know what a flare gun is once the fight starts and property starts flying around? Do you really want that dog in the middle of that?
He's a Labrador Retriever. He's a friendly guy. He was just stuck barking behind the counter doing a whole lot of nothing. We still love him, though. He's a great dog.
In Connecticut, another daring theft puts dozens of people in danger.
The video is exactly like a movie.
It's a wild scene that all begins at 11:15 a.m. on January 6th, 2021 in West Haven, Connecticut.
Police get a call of two teenagers that have stolen a car.
Around New Haven, the crime has gone up. Right now, stolen cars would be at the top of the list.
Two teenagers have stolen a luxury vehicle and decided to go on a mini crime spree, just snatching purses and robbing random places, all while driving around in this fancy car. This vehicle has been reported missing for a few days.
The first task for police is to try and locate the car.
The police were working with the car's manufacturer to use a built-in GPS to track the vehicle.
They ping the location of the vehicle and see it on a map.
The police catch up with the stolen car, and then all hell breaks loose.
The teens try to outdrive the police, striking multiple cars in the process. Then they flee.
At that point, it was an attempt to escape.
Police manage to chase one of the teens down. But what happens next shocks everyone.
You see the individual actually runs back to the police car, gets in the police car.
Get out! He's trying to steal the cop car.
Stunned bystanders start filming on their phones as the bold teen tries to get away in the police car.
Stealing a police car is not something that we see every day, at least from the perspective that we were able to see it in this situation. He puts it in reverse.
Police, I'm in the cop car.
The wild driver is out of control, forcing police to scramble to get out of the way.
It's really scary.
And then things get downright terrifying.
After he backs into that vehicle, he accelerates fast, hits a police officer.
The officer comes within inches of being crushed by the runaway car.
Now the officers have found themselves in a really perilous situation, because now one of their own police cruisers has been stolen, and it's being used as a weapon against them as the teen driver is running over them.
I would say that police immediate concern in that situation would be the possibility of them crashing into somebody or hurting an innocent bystander.
It's an incredibly dangerous situation. This is a 5,000 or 6,000 pound vehicle. This could be a matter of life and death, and these kids don't care.
A vehicle could be considered a deadly weapon for a reason. These officers have to get the situation under control before they go out and do more damage. This teenager is acting as if he has nothing to lose. Everyone around the surrounding area is in grave danger.
Nobody knows what the desperate teen driver is thinking, but now he's headed straight for the nearby cemetery.
He floors it, going all the way through a gate into a cemetery.
This was an act of desperation to further evade the police. The teen didn't have any idea what he was going to do next.
He jumps the curb and over the sidewalk into a wrought iron big fence goes through the fence, and begins to drive through the cemetery.
Bro, what the?
As police frantically try to chase after him, the teen tries to make a run for it through the Oak Grove Cemetery.
I mean, if you're going to try to evade the police, driving through a cemetery is probably not the best option. There are many obstacles trying to get through a cemetery between headstones and trees and fences. But yet, this teen driver drives through all of them.
He kind of stayed parallel to the perimeter of the cemetery, passing people's tombstones. I think the teen just wanted to get away, ultimately. You gotta run, you gotta get away at all costs.
And this runaway driver is willing to try anything.
Our car thief crashes through an 8-foot cemetery gate and then believes he can crash through the next.
You suck, bro.
Police and bystanders are stunned.
Bro, what?
The teen seems to think he's invincible.
This driver thought he could ram through anything.
Looking at an 8-foot tall metal gate, what makes him think, yeah, I can crash this? This kid thinks he's in an action movie. Using a police cruiser as a battering ram to rush through cemetery gates?
But this time, the police cruiser gets stuck.
After the second crash, when the vehicle gets lodged in the gate, the kid hops out and he's still determined to make a getaway. But that's not gonna happen. Not today.
All the responding officers that were on scene immediately ran and drove over to the other side of the cemetery to help apprehend the other suspect. He tries to run. He gets to maybe 15 yards before they deployed a taser and were able to apprehend him.
Yo!
With both teens now finally in custody, the gravity of the whole situation really sinks in.
These teens acted recklessly. They risked the lives of many other people, not to mention law enforcement officers that lives were put in danger. That could have ended in huge tragedy.
Oh, that cop ran over. Yeah, he's hurt.
Now, the injured police officers are taken to the hospital and are treated and have non-life-threatening injuries.
Luckily, no one else was injured.
The story about the wild teens trying to outdrive and outrun the police shocks newscasters.
Yesterday morning, just after 11 o'clock, a crazy crash involving a police cruiser stolen by a 15-year-old who jumped the curb and ran right into this cemetery. The cemetery fence plowed over. Miraculously, it does not look like any of the grave sites were disturbed.
And the video quickly goes viral.
Pretty quickly, it was all over the place.
Kevin Morse, who runs a local Facebook group that shares videos of crimes in the area, is flooded with clips from bystanders.
We got videos sent in from the scene, like immediately after it happened. I couldn't believe it when we saw the footage. This could have been a very deadly ending. You had multiple police officers that were almost run over by the stolen police car. And then you also had 2 teenagers that could have been shot or killed throughout the chase. We received probably a dozen messages when this was occurring. It amazes me how people are just so quick to pull out their phones. You know, they'll pull out their phones quicker than they'll worry about their own safety.
People can't stop talking about how the wild video seems like it's straight out of an action film.
The video is exactly what you could see out of a movie.
With people seeing police chases in movies and video games and news reports, you know, people seem to think that these things happen on a pretty regular basis, but they're not as common as one would think. The actions of these teenagers was horrific. They were absolutely insane for driving the way they were. They were not taking into account the safety of other people, especially the police officers. It was completely reckless.
Yeah, he's hurt.
They have no fear. I think they're used to playing video games and they're able to do these acts without any consequences. And from their friends, they're getting high fives, cheers about their gameplay. I think video game addiction can cause heavy influence on someone's mental state, kids, adults, anyone. But kids more importantly because their brains are still developing.
The police are applauded for controlling the situation.
Police officers here clearly put themselves in danger, and their actions are heroic. They're trying to stop someone who's driving maniacally through the streets from injuring or killing other people.
And everyone hopes the teens realize just how reckless their actions were.
I hope that they've learned their lesson and they don't continue to live this way and put other people's lives in danger.
I don't think these two ever expected their thrill ride to end in the gate of a cemetery, but that's exactly where it ends.
It's horrifying.
Why would someone do this? Why didn't they even stop?
It was severely bad. I did not recognize myself.
No, she could have been paralyzed or even dead.
And it leads to a demand for answers.
They want that driver to come forward.
There was a lot of anger.
And later, another chilling crime.
It happened so quickly, they didn't even have time to react.
Also ignites fury.
We're talking about little old ladies.
This mugshot was the man who took a woman's purse and then nearly ran her over.
July 3rd, 2021, Lincoln, Nebraska. A July 4th party ends in terror.
An annual 3rd of July party that would soon descend into chaos.
Happened in a split second, we couldn't even see.
The day begins simply enough, an annual cookout for close friends and family. 21-year-old Amelia Graham invites everyone to her home and pays for it all.
Amelia, she's very down to earth and loving, a caring and generous person.
That's my favorite holiday. We always have a barbecue.
It was a full-on party, at least 100 people. The atmosphere was super fun.
Traditionally, the annual party ends with a fireworks show in the street, where everyone takes turns putting on a show.
All my friends bring their own. Personally, I do like just lighting them off myself because it's like, oh, I lit that one off, you guys.
A lot of the kids obviously couldn't wait their turns. Moms or dads would walk their kids out to the street and, light the firework with them.
Still, everyone is aware of the potential danger.
There's a lot of trees around here. That's a fire hazard. So we do light them off in the streets.
And although setting off fireworks in an active street is technically illegal in Nebraska, it's not unusual to see during the holiday.
We have never had any issues with any vehicle. Sometimes they honk.
A lot of the cars who were going through the block were waiting for the fireworks to be done and then driving.
Before Amelia begins her fireworks show, a friend lights something known as a fountain.
It's like an overgrown sparkler. It's a shower of sparks and bright light.
It's almost blinding, and when it goes off, something horrifying happens.
I was in the middle of the driveway, and I just see a flash of light come out of my right eye.
It's so shocking, it takes a moment to realize that a car has slammed into someone. And it's Amelia.
I turned my eyes for a split second and I just saw a body flying up into the air. She was standing in the middle of the street and her body ends up on the curbside. I instantly called 911.
911 operator.
Amelia is severely injured.
She was bleeding from the head, the nose. I was terrified. It was gushing out of her mouth onto the street. I was scared.
Adonya's friends and family are in a complete panic.
My sister is literally pulling her hair out. And Amelia's mom was screaming, she was crying.
Whoever did this to Amelia, they didn't even slow down to see what happened.
We all were yelling, why would someone do this? Why didn't they even stop after they hit her? The car went through the four-way stop, blowing through about 40 miles per hour.
Was this a horrible accident, or was Amelia targeted on purpose?
You would hope that it was not the intent of the driver to strike the pedestrian. They did. Some kind of deliberate act.
I was so in shock. It could have been anyone.
It all happened so quickly, nobody sees the driver or the license plate.
It was a black Chevy Impala. We didn't know who it was.
And Amelia is in bad shape.
She was unconscious. I was trying to talk to her.
With an ambulance racing to the scene, Adanya tries to stay calm as she relays information to 911.
I just felt, completely sick to my stomach. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating. They asked me if she was still conscious and still breathing.
Everyone is terrified Amelia won't make it. But then she opens her eyes.
I was just kind of laying there. I was trying to get up. I couldn't get up.
She got a concussion from slamming onto the concrete. She skid across the street.
Amelia is rushed to the hospital.
I had to have surgery on my collarbone and they had to put a plate in it. I did have really bad road rash all over my body. My hands were all scabbed and stuff. It was fairly bad. I did not recognize myself. My face means a lot to me. And then for it to just get completely destroyed, I was scared of myself, actually.
But she's lucky it isn't worse.
She could have been paralyzed, brain dead, or even dead.
Who ran her down? And why were they in such a hurry to get away?
I was just lighting a firework. I did see the car approaching, I put my hands up, like, stop. It was pretty terrifying. I was hit in the front and then I kind of just rolled. I just got knocked out.
At the scene, police interview eyewitnesses and gather physical evidence.
The suspect vehicle struck a parked car, leaving a transfer of black paint. The suspect's vehicle mirror broke off. Collecting that mirror, preserving that paint, could be crucial.
Still, police tell Amelia and her family that they don't have much to go on.
There was a lot of anger in my house. Everyone was just kind of upset.
So friends and family take matters into their own hands, knocking on neighbors' doors to find out if anyone has video from that night.
The neighbors across the street had a doorbell with a camera.
Then they release that video to the media in hopes of catching whoever is behind the wheel.
Tonight, a 21-year-old Lincoln woman is left with unanswered questions and severe injuries.
Unbelievable video of a hit and run and the victim talking to Channel 8.
I wouldn't wish this on anybody, at all.
The footage sparks immediate outrage.
They want that driver to come forward.
And just 2 days after the video goes viral, 22-year-old Isabel Knapp Cuevas tells police that she may have been involved, but claims she thought she hit a firework, not a person. Amelia's family is furious.
Anyone in their right mind would know that that kind of impact would have not been a firework.
None of us are buying it. When you hit a rock, you see it hit your windshield. If you hit a person, it would be hard to not see it. I did hit her windshield.
Big difference between hitting a firework and hitting a human being.
Police match the paint residue in the broken side mirror found at the scene to the black Chevy Impala that Isabel drives. They also discover something else. Her license is revoked for a past DUI.
While you're on the suspended list, your driving privileges are suspended and you're not allowed to be driving the vehicle.
And that explains why she fled in a panic.
The entire thing is exacerbated if there is personal injury involved while you're operating a vehicle while you're revoked.
Isabel is charged with leaving the scene of an injury accident, property damage, no vehicle registration, a stop sign violation, and driving while her license was revoked.
I do not believe she would have turned herself in if there wasn't anything posted on social media.
She knew that she was just going to get caught based on how many people were sharing and commenting on the video.
Not all of the reaction to the video is positive.
Why were you in the street? You saw that there were cars coming. You shouldn't be lighting fireworks off.
But the majority of the comments have been sympathetic.
Oh, you're lucky to be alive. We're very thankful God was there watching over you. You're going to be okay. It meant a lot to me knowing that there's still a lot of good people out there like that.
Amelia still isn't fully healed and suffers from memory loss.
Her recovery was super tough. She couldn't do basic things. She always needed assistance for everything.
It's a process to put myself back together. I think overall I'm doing a pretty good job at it. But for me, I want to move past it as fast as possible.
Moving past it includes not harboring anger towards the woman who caused her pain.
I don't really have any hate towards her or anything like that. I just kind of would want to know why she didn't stop or even try to slow down or why she didn't see if I was okay.
The one thing that does make Amelia sad is that for her, the 4th of July will never be the same.
It just sucks. I will never be able to enjoy it again. I don't believe I will ever light a fireworks, actually.
But she knows that's a small price to pay.
The lessons I've learned, never to stand in the street again. I look at it as I have another chance. I'm not going to let it stop me.
In Florida, another disturbing crime takes a dark turn that no one saw coming. December 6th, 2018, Okeechobee, Florida. It's about 8 p.m. A craving for fast food takes a horrifying turn for a grandmother out on the town.
Robbery that happened in a flash was all caught on camera. Tonight, the thief is still on the run.
I had no idea that anybody would even do something like that. I guess it shocked me.
That night, after decorating their church with Christmas decorations, 76-year-old Janice Allen treats her friend, Miss Willie, to a fast food meal.
So these are obviously good ladies, good Samaritans out doing good deeds in their community.
Miss Willie and I are pals. We go everywhere together. And we sat next to the door at the back.
What they don't realize is there's a mysterious man in the parking lot outside. He is watching Miss Willie and Janice through the restaurant window, and then comes inside.
All of a sudden, we see a tall, slender, white-haired man enter from the bottom of the screen.
Janice had her back to the man.
He came out of nowhere. Miss Willie was reaching for a nugget, I think, and she just looked up and said, "He's got your purse."
At first, the women don't quite grasp what's happening.
Their belief is suspended. They don't want to believe that they either were about to be or in fact became victims of a crime.
It happened so quickly, they didn't even have time to react.
But it only takes a few moments to realize they've just been robbed, and Janice isn't having it.
And it was just like, wow. I just jumped up and went after him.
He bolts for the door. And I'm very impressed with her instinct. She takes off running after this man out the door. She's got this long flowing cloak, kind of feeling like Little Red Riding Hood vibe.
He was very swift. I mean, he had long legs, and I've got very short legs.
Janice is in hot pursuit as the suspect dashes to his getaway car.
I was behind him. He went right to the car, maybe 6-7 feet, not very far.
She sees the man get in a silver SUV. She doesn't stop and scream for help. She doesn't yell at him. She doesn't pound on the hood of the car. Oh no, she actually reaches for the driver's side door.
He opened the door and he started to close it. Well, I grabbed the handle.
Her reaction was to open the door and basically physically go inside the car, reach inside the car to recover her purse.
For a 76-year-old woman, this is a bold move.
I did not see his face. All I can remember is he flipped the purse. There must have been somebody else in the car.
The panicked suspect throws the purse to a woman who is sitting in the passenger seat.
This guy's thinking he's gonna make a clean getaway, but he must have been completely dumbfounded when he looks over and sees this woman coming after her purse.
Then, the thief hits the gas. And that's when something terrible happens.
He started to back up, and I was still holding onto the door, and it flung me under. My head is what hit that cement.
It's a terrifying moment. Janice is dragged across the pavement of this parking lot. It's a very tough thing to watch. You can definitely tell she's very, very close to the tires of this fast-moving car, and you can actually see her shoe fall off at the end where the car runs over her foot.
He ran over my elbow and my ankle on the right side.
Janice is knocked unconscious. And for a moment, her attacker hesitates.
He has a clear line of sight to see this woman laid out on the pavement, obviously in pain. You can still see the passenger of this car and the driver. The interior lights are on. They're not reacting. He hesitates for just maybe a split second, but then after that, he's out of there lickety-split. Zero compassion.
Shocked bystanders and Janice's friend, Miss Willie, all run to her side. One woman frantically dials for help. This is serious. Janice is slipping in and out of consciousness, and the trauma to her head is severe.
I can remember Miss Willie saying, "Don't move her, don't move her." I don't remember anything else.
Who would do this, and why?
We're talking about little old ladies. They're in their 70s. They just finished volunteering at their church, and this guy, this scumbag, chooses them.
In the hospital, doctors keep Janice under close observation due to swelling on the brain.
It's your brain, and it has no place to go. And it's very, very painful.
Everyone is baffled by the callous crime.
Of all the people this guy could have targeted this day, this may be the most cruel.
But police have little to go on.
They don't really have a clear image of the suspect. They don't have a clear license plate. All of those things creates a very difficult task for law enforcement in locating and apprehending the suspect.
Whoever the suspect is, he is in serious trouble.
Not only when the vehicle strikes Janice does it go from theft to robbery, but now a whole new offense is created, and that is a hit and run.
And all of it was for a shockingly small reward.
Only $4 in cash in the purse. Keys, credit cards, identification, all of that, all except the $4, was left in a parking lot nearby.
The one thing police do know is that this man seems to be a serial purse robber.
As it turns out, this was not this guy's first attempt. There were 2 other victims that he attempted to rob earlier the day, but he was never apprehended.
In an attempt to generate leads, police released the video to the media, and the story goes viral overnight.
Breaking news now, an elderly woman in the hospital tonight after she was nearly run over by a car.
'Tis a season for crimes of opportunity. The grandmother was eating a Happy Meal when her handbag was stolen.
I was raised to always respect my elders. So watching something like this for me is deeply disturbing. This is not only disrespecting someone in the older generation, this is actually a violent assault against one of them caught on camera.
After 3 days, Janice is released from the hospital. There's a lingering threat of a dangerous blood clot developing near her brain, but her elbow and ankle, which the thief ran over, didn't break.
And they were all black and blue for a long, long time. Very badly bruised.
But not long after she gets home, there's some good news. The suspect has turned himself in.
All new this morning, this mugshot just into our newsroom of the man who deputies say took a woman's purse and then nearly ran her over.
This purse snatcher's sister sees the videos floating around Facebook. She knows it's him, and she convinces him to turn himself in.
His humanity, for whatever reason, surfaces.
I think he was afraid. He was fearful of what would happen if he did not turn himself in and he got caught.
Authorities charged 50-year-old Charles Alton Stratton Jr. with aggravated battery, robbery, and grand theft. His excuse for the violent attack?
According to police, Stratton told them that he was, quote, jonesing for some crack cocaine. That's why he stole the purse.
He was on drugs, and he wanted money for drugs.
On social media, there's intense outrage. But not everyone is kind to Janice.
People said that was a stupid thing to do. Well, maybe it was. My great-grandson, he's 7, and he said, I saw that, Grandma. What were you doing?
Probably not the smartest decision, but who are we to judge?
A year later, Stratton is sentenced to 15 years in prison. Janice wants to see her attacker in person, so she goes to court. But surprisingly, she feels sorry for him.
We're all sinners. We all make mistakes. He apologized. He was really sorry. He could not come up to me. He was over there with chains on, and I says, I forgive you. And he bowed his head and said, thank you.
And that kind of makes sense. We know that Janice is a member of the Christian faith. We know that she values things like forgiveness. And honestly, I've got a lot of respect for this take because I'm not sure I would have the same approach.
Still, Janice says if it happened again, she'd do things differently.
People do not realize the danger that is around us.
The purse is not worth your life. Stuff can be replaced, you can't.
Janice is still in therapy and suffers from dizzy spells and memory loss. But her sunny attitude never changes.
I know the Lord has a plan for all of us. I think he left me here for a reason. He wasn't finished with me yet.
On the morning of May 6th, 2016, the countryside of Calabria appeared unchanged. The rolling agricultural land surrounding the small community of Lombardy lay beneath a quiet sky. Dirt roads cut through fields that had been cultivated for generations. Farms dotted the landscape, separated by fences, groves, and stretches of open ground. To an outsider, it was the kind of place where time seemed to move more slowly than in Italy's larger cities. Life revolved around family, land, and tradition. Yet beneath that calm exterior, forces existed that outsiders often struggled to fully understand. Forces tied to power, influence, loyalty, and fear. On that particular morning, none of those hidden tensions were immediately visible. There was no sign that a woman was about to disappear. There was no indication that a case would emerge that would shock Italy and become one of the country's most disturbing examples of what investigators would later describe as a lupera bianca, crime in which a victim vanishes so completely that even their body seems to have been erased from existence. The woman who drove toward her farm that day was Maria Chindamo. She was 42 years old, a mother of 3 children, a businesswoman, a farmer, a woman attempting to rebuild her life after unimaginable personal tragedy. For Maria, May 6th was not an ordinary date. It marked exactly 1 year since the death of her husband, Vincenzo Punteriero. The anniversary undoubtedly carried emotional weight. 1 year earlier, her life had been transformed by loss. Since then, she had assumed responsibilities that many people would find overwhelming. She had continued raising her children. She had taken control of agricultural operations. She had faced the practical and emotional consequences of becoming a widow. To those who knew her, Maria was not someone who had surrendered to grief. She was moving forward. She was rebuilding. She was attempting to create a future beyond tragedy. That morning, as she traveled to her agricultural property near Montalto di Lombardi, there was no public indication that danger was waiting for her. At some point during the day, however, something happened. Something interrupted the ordinary rhythm of her schedule. Something prevented her from returning home. Something ensured that those who loved her would never see her again. The exact moments remain hidden behind the silence of an investigation that would take years to unfold. What is known is remarkably simple. Maria arrived at her property. After that, she disappeared. At first, there may have been no reason for immediate alarm. Adults miss phone calls. People become delayed. Work on a farm often demands attention for hours at a time. Yet as time passed, concern began to grow. Family members attempted to reach her. Communication that should have been routine suddenly became impossible. Calls went unanswered. There was no explanation, no message, no indication of where she might be. The silence expanded. Hours became increasingly significant. Anxiety replaced expectation. Concern turned into fear. Eventually, investigators became involved. When authorities arrived at the farm, they encountered a scene that immediately suggested something was terribly wrong. Maria's SUV was still there. The vehicle had not vanished. It had not been driven away. It remained where she had left it. Yet Maria herself was nowhere to be found. The sight raised immediate questions. If she had left voluntarily, why leave her vehicle behind? If she had chosen to go somewhere, why was there no sign of where she had gone? The vehicle was only the beginning. Investigators soon noticed additional details. The door of the SUV was open. Personal belongings were scattered nearby. Her eyeglasses were found at the scene. On the ground, there were traces of blood. One item in particular appeared conspicuously absent: her mobile phone. Each discovery added another layer of uncertainty. Each piece of evidence suggested interruption rather than departure. The scene did not resemble the actions of someone calmly walking away from their responsibilities. Instead, it appeared frozen in the middle of an event. An unfinished moment, a sudden disruption. The kind of disruption investigators encounter when something has gone violently wrong. The presence of blood immediately intensified concern. Blood alone does not explain a crime. It does not reveal what happened. It does not identify perpetrators. Yet it signals the possibility of injury, struggle, or violence. Combined with the abandoned vehicle and scattered belongings, it painted a troubling picture. Investigators quickly began asking difficult questions. Had Maria been attacked? Had she been forced into another vehicle? Had multiple people been involved? Was this a planned operation or an impulsive act? Most importantly, was Maria still alive? In missing person cases, uncertainty can be both a source of hope and a source of agony. As long as no body is found, families often cling to the possibility that their loved one might return. At the same time, the absence of answers creates a unique form of suffering. Every possibility remains open. Every theory remains alive. Every telephone call becomes a potential breakthrough. Every knock at the door carries significance. In Maria's case, those questions would not be resolved quickly. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The search for answers continued, but the woman at the center of the investigation remained missing. For her family, the uncertainty must have been devastating. Somewhere between hope and fear lies a territory inhabited by the families of the disappeared. It is a place where grief cannot fully begin because certainty never arrives. It is a place where every new day brings the same unanswered question: what happened? The scene at the farm continued to haunt investigators. The evidence pointed toward foul play, yet critical pieces were missing. There was no direct explanation, no clear reconstruction of events, no obvious witness stepping forward with a complete account. Instead, there was absence. Absence of the victim, absence of a body, absence of immediate answers. In many criminal investigations, a body provides a starting point. It reveals injuries. It offers forensic evidence. It helps establish timelines and causes of death. Without a body, investigators face an enormous challenge. They must reconstruct events from fragments. They must build a case from what remains rather than from what is present. In Maria's disappearance, that challenge would define the investigation for years. The missing body was not simply an obstacle. It would eventually become one of the most significant elements of the case itself. As authorities examined possible explanations, they increasingly considered the possibility that Maria had not merely disappeared. They began to suspect that someone had intended for her to vanish completely. In Italy, There's a phrase associated with such crimes, lupera bianca. The term carries a chilling meaning. It refers to murders in which victims disappear without a trace, their bodies hidden or destroyed so effectively that physical evidence is nearly impossible to recover. Historically, the term has often been associated with organized crime and efforts to eliminate both victims and proof of their deaths. To investigators familiar with such cases, the possibility was deeply troubling. If Maria had become a victim of a lupera bianca, finding answers would be extraordinarily difficult. Yet difficult does not mean impossible. At the beginning of the investigation, however, authorities could not know where the evidence would lead. They did not yet know how many years the search would require. They did not yet know how deeply the case might connect to broader criminal networks. They did not yet know that future arrests, witness testimony, and anti-mafia operations would gradually expose allegations so horrifying that they would capture headlines across Italy. All they knew was what stood before them on that day: an abandoned SUV, an open door, scattered personal belongings, traces of blood, and a missing woman. Sometimes the most haunting crime scenes are not those filled with destruction. Sometimes they are scenes defined by absence: an empty chair at a dinner table, a phone that stops ringing, a house that remains waiting for someone who never returns. In Maria Chindamo's case, the abandoned vehicle became a symbol of that absence. It represented a life interrupted without warning, a routine journey transformed into a mystery, a mother separated from her children, a businesswoman removed from the work she had fought to preserve, a woman whose future seemed to stop in the middle of an ordinary day. Yet the mystery of Maria Chindamo was never simply about a disappearance. As investigators would eventually discover, understanding what happened required understanding who Maria was, the world she lived in, and the circumstances that surrounded her life. Her story did not begin on May 6, 2016. It began years earlier, among the agricultural lands of Calabria, where family, property, tradition, and power often intersected in ways that outsiders rarely saw. To understand why Maria disappeared, it is necessary to look beyond the crime scene and examine the woman at the center of the case. Before she became a missing person, before she became a headline, before prosecutors and investigators spent years searching for answers, Maria Chindamo was a mother, a farmer, and a woman determined to build a future on her own terms. And it is there, with the story of her life, rather than her disappearance, that the next chapter begins. Long before investigators would arrive at a farm and discover an abandoned vehicle, before prosecutors would spend years attempting to piece together a crime without a body, and before headlines across Italy would transform her name into a symbol of resistance against organized crime, Maria Chindamo was simply a woman trying to build a life. The tragedy of her story is often told through the lens of her disappearance. But understanding what happened requires looking beyond the crime itself. It requires understanding who Maria was, what she represented, and why her existence may have threatened people who preferred a different social order. Every true crime story begins with a victim. Yet victims are often reduced to a single moment in time, the moment something terrible happens to them. Their identities become overshadowed by the crimes committed against them. In Maria's case, however, the years leading up to her disappearance are essential to understanding the case. The decisions she made, the responsibilities she accepted, and the independence she demonstrated would later become central themes in the investigation. Maria Chindamo was born in 1973 and spent her life in Calabria, a region in southern Italy known for its breathtaking landscapes, agricultural traditions, and deeply rooted local communities. Calabria is a place where history is visible everywhere. Ancient villages cling to hillsides. Families often remain connected to the same land for generations. Agriculture continues to play a significant role in daily life, and ownership of land can carry economic, social, and cultural significance far beyond its monetary value. Within this environment, Maria established herself as a businesswoman in the agricultural sector. She was not merely someone who lived in the countryside. She actively participated in the demanding world of farming and agricultural management. She oversaw substantial farmland in the area surrounding Lombardy, located within the province of Vibo Valentia. Managing agricultural property is rarely a simple task. It requires long hours, financial planning, constant decision-making, and an ability to navigate unpredictable challenges. Weather conditions can alter entire seasons. Market fluctuations can affect profitability. Equipment, labor, and land management require continual attention. Success often depends on resilience and persistence. By all accounts available through the public record, Maria embraced those responsibilities. She was also a mother of 3 children. That fact alone adds another dimension to her story. Every major decision she made carried implications not only for herself, but also for her family. Parenthood often means balancing competing demands, providing stability, ensuring security, managing finances, and preparing children for the future. For Maria, these responsibilities existed alongside the pressures of running agricultural operations. Her life, like many lives, was shaped by obligations that rarely make headlines. Yet those ordinary responsibilities are precisely what make her story so compelling. She was not famous. She was not a public figure. She was a working mother attempting to navigate the challenges of everyday life. For many years, Maria shared that life with her husband, Vincenzo Panariero. Publicly available information about their private relationship remains limited, and it is important not to speculate beyond the established facts. What is known is that their family experienced a devastating turning point in May 2015. Vincenzo died by suicide. The loss fundamentally altered the trajectory of Maria's life. The death of a spouse is among the most difficult experiences a person can endure. Beyond grief itself, there are practical realities that immediately emerge. Responsibilities that were once shared must suddenly be carried alone. Financial matters require attention. Family dynamics shift. Future plans must be reconsidered. For a parent, there's also the challenge of helping children process a loss while simultaneously coping with personal grief. Maria found herself confronting all of these realities. The anniversary of Vincenzo's death would later become one of the most haunting details in the timeline of her disappearance. But before that date acquired its tragic significance, there was an entire year during which Maria attempted to rebuild her life. Following her husband's death, she assumed direct control over family assets and agricultural operations. She became responsible for managing the business interests associated with the land. She continued raising her 3 children. She moved forward despite circumstances that might have overwhelmed many people. From the perspective of investigators who would later examine her life, this period was critically important. It revealed a woman who was not retreating from responsibility, but stepping into it. The image that emerges is one of determination rather than surrender. Maria did not disappear from public life after her husband's death. Instead, she continued working. She continued managing her affairs. She continued making decisions about her future. Such actions may appear ordinary to many observers. In countless places around the world, widows routinely take control of businesses, property, and family responsibilities. Yet context matters. The environment in which Maria lived would later become a major focus of the investigation. Prosecutors examining the case argued that her growing independence placed her in direct conflict with expectations held by certain individuals connected to organized crime. To understand that claim, it is necessary to understand the broader environment surrounding the case. Calabria has long been associated with the presence of 'Ndrangheta, one of Italy's most powerful organized crime organizations. The group's influence has been the subject of countless investigations and anti-mafia operations. While the vast majority of residents in Calabria are ordinary citizens leading honest lives, prosecutors have repeatedly described how criminal networks can exert influence over local economies, social relationships, and property interests in certain areas. According to investigators, these dynamics formed part of the backdrop to Maria's story. Land ownership, in particular, carried significant importance. Agricultural land represented more than fields and crops. It represented economic value, influence, and opportunity. Control of land could affect business interests and local power structures. Following her husband's death, ownership and management responsibilities increasingly rested with Maria. This fact would later become one of several potential motives examined during the investigation. Yet land alone was not the only factor that drew attention. Prosecutors would eventually focus on another aspect of Maria's life: her determination to move forward personally after becoming a widow. At some point following her husband's death, Maria entered a new romantic relationship. Again, the details remain private and largely outside the public record. What matters from an investigative standpoint is not the identity of the relationship, but what it symbolized. Maria was rebuilding her life. She was making choices about her future. She was exercising autonomy over personal decisions. According to prosecutors, these choices became significant because they challenged expectations held by certain individuals operating within a deeply patriarchal environment. The concept of patriarchy can sometimes appear abstract when discussed in social analysis, but investigators examining Maria's case treated it as a concrete factor. They argued that some individuals connected to organized crime viewed a widow's independence as unacceptable. From this perspective, Maria's willingness to control her own property, manage her own business, and pursue her own relationships represented a form of defiance. Whether she intended such defiance is almost beside the point. The significance lies in how others may have perceived her actions. One of the most striking elements of the case is that prosecutors later pointed to Maria's independence itself as a potential motive. In many criminal investigations, motives revolve around money, revenge, jealousy, or concealment of another crime. In Maria's case, investigators suggested that freedom, specifically a woman's freedom to direct her own life, may have played a role. This interpretation transformed the case from a local homicide investigation into something larger. It raised questions about power, control, and the consequences faced by individuals who refuse to submit to intimidation. The image that emerged during the investigation was not that of a woman seeking conflict. Rather, it was the image of a woman attempting to live normally after tragedy. She was caring for her children. She was operating a farm. She was making decisions about her future. Yet according to prosecutors, those ordinary acts carried extraordinary implications within her environment. Her ownership of valuable land created one potential source of tension. Her economic independence created another. Her personal independence created yet another. Each factor existed alongside the others, forming a complex picture that investigators would spend years attempting to understand. It is important to recognize that none of these factors automatically explains what happened to Maria. At the time she disappeared, no one knew which aspects of her life would eventually become central to the investigation. Family members searching for answers could not yet know how prosecutors would later interpret the evidence. Investigators could not yet know which theories would prove significant and which would not. All of those conclusions lay in the future. What existed in the present was a woman navigating a difficult chapter of her life. The year between May 2015 and May 2016 appears, in retrospect, almost like a crossroads. On one side stood profound loss. On the other stood a future Maria was attempting to create. She had endured the death of her husband. She had accepted responsibility for her family's livelihood. She had continued managing agricultural operations. She had begun building a new personal life. Every available fact suggests movement forward rather than backward. Yet the very qualities that allowed her to move forward may also have contributed to the dangers surrounding her. Later, anti-mafia prosecutor Nicola Gratteri would describe Maria's case in terms that emphasized her desire for autonomy. His comments reflected a broader interpretation of the crime, one that viewed her not merely as a victim of violence, but as a victim of a system seeking to punish independence. Whether examined through the lens of organized crime, economic interests, or social control, the central figure remains the same, a woman determined to make her own decisions. As investigators would eventually discover, the circumstances surrounding Maria's disappearance were far more complicated than a simple missing person case. Hidden beneath the surface were questions involving land ownership, organized crime, personal freedom, and power. But on the morning of May 6, 2016, none of those questions had yet become public. There was only Maria, driving toward her farm as she had likely done many times before. There was only another workday in the countryside of Calabria. There was only a woman focused on her responsibilities and her future. What happened next would transform her life into one of Italy's most haunting criminal investigations. The woman who had spent a year rebuilding after tragedy was about to vanish, and the mystery surrounding her disappearance would force investigators to examine every aspect of the world she lived in. The farm, the land, the relationships, the power structures, and the forces operating in the shadows of Calabria would all become part of a search for answers. That search began on a spring morning when Maria Cindimo drove to work and never came home. The most haunting moments in many criminal investigations are not always the moments investigators fully understand. Often, they are the moments obscured by uncertainty, the minutes or hours during which something terrible occurred. Yet no complete record remains. The disappearance of Maria Cindimo is one such case. Even after years of investigation, arrests, witness testimony, and prosecutorial findings, many details of the crime remain hidden within a period of time that cannot be perfectly reconstructed. What investigators eventually established was not a complete minute-by-minute account, but a framework built from physical evidence, known movements, and later investigative discoveries. Within that framework lies one of the most disturbing disappearances in modern Italian criminal history. The morning of May 6, 2016, began like countless other mornings in the agricultural areas surrounding Lombardy and Montalto di Lombardy. Farmers prepared for work. Vehicles moved along rural roads. Agricultural operations continued according to familiar routines. Nothing about the landscape suggested that a major criminal investigation was about to begin. For Maria Cindimo, the day carried a painful significance. It marked exactly 1 year since the death of her husband, Vincenzo Punteriero. Anniversaries often provoke reflection. They can bring memories to the surface, reminding people of both loss and survival. Maria had spent the previous year rebuilding her life after tragedy. She had assumed control of family assets. She had continued raising her 3 children. She had managed agricultural operations that required constant attention. She had begun moving forward, like many working days before it. May 6th involved a trip to her agricultural property near Montalto di Lombardy. At some point that morning, Maria arrived at the farm. This would become the final confirmed point in her known timeline. It is the last moment investigators can place her with certainty. Beyond that point, the narrative becomes fragmented. The silence begins. In missing person investigations, timelines are crucial. Investigators seek to identify the last confirmed sighting, the final phone call, the last documented activity. These details help establish when a crime may have occurred and narrow the range of possibilities. In Maria's case, however, the timeline would prove unusually difficult to reconstruct. There was no public account of a final conversation that revealed fear or concern. There was no documented warning that danger was approaching. There was simply a woman arriving at work and then vanishing. At first, her absence may not have appeared immediately alarming. People become busy. Plans change. Unexpected tasks arise, especially in agriculture, where work often takes place across large properties and communication may be interrupted by practical demands. Delays are not always unusual, but as the hours passed, concern began to grow. Family members attempted to contact Maria. Calls went unanswered. Time continued moving forward, yet no explanation emerged. The lack of communication became increasingly troubling. For those closest to her, uncertainty gradually transformed into anxiety. Something was wrong. The precise sequence of events during those hours remains unknown. But eventually the concern became serious enough to trigger a search. Investigators and authorities would soon arrive at the property where Maria had last been seen. What they found immediately suggested that this was not a routine disappearance. The first thing that drew attention was Maria's vehicle. Her SUV remained at the farm. The vehicle had not been driven away. It had not disappeared along with its owner. Instead, it stood as silent evidence that whatever had happened likely occurred at or near the property itself. The presence of the vehicle immediately raised questions. If Maria had left voluntarily, why leave behind her means of transportation? Why abandon a vehicle needed for travel across a rural area? Why disappear without taking it? Investigators knew that voluntary disappearances often involve preparation. People who choose to leave generally take personal belongings, transportation, and items necessary for travel. The scene before them suggested something very different. Then came another disturbing observation. The SUV's door was open. A seemingly simple detail can carry significant weight in a criminal investigation. An open vehicle door suggests interruption. It suggests activity that was not completed. It creates the image of a person who either left suddenly or was prevented from continuing whatever they had been doing. Standing alone, the open door might not have meant much. Combined with everything else investigators would discover, however, it became part of a far more troubling picture. Nearby, personal belongings were found scattered around the area. Among those items were Maria's eyeglasses. Personal possessions are often important because they reveal what a person considered essential. Most individuals do not voluntarily abandon items they use regularly. Eyeglasses, in particular, are not typically discarded without reason. Their presence at the scene suggested that Maria had not calmly gathered her belongings and departed. Instead, the evidence appeared consistent with an unexpected and potentially violent interruption. Investigators then identified what would become one of the most alarming discoveries: traces of blood on the ground. Blood changes the nature of an investigation. While it does not automatically reveal the extent of an injury or establish a specific crime, it introduces the possibility of violence. Combined with the abandoned vehicle and scattered possessions, the blood significantly increased concerns that Maria had become the victim of foul play. Investigators now faced a troubling collection of facts. The victim was missing. Her vehicle remained behind. Personal items were scattered around the scene. Blood was present. Yet one important object appeared absent: Maria's mobile phone. The missing phone immediately attracted attention. In modern investigations, mobile devices often provide critical evidence. They contain communication records, location information, and digital traces of daily activity. The fact that the phone was missing while other personal items remained behind suggested that whoever was responsible may have understood its potential value. Alternatively, Maria may have still possessed the phone when events unfolded. Investigators could not yet know. What they did know was that the absence of the device added another layer of complexity to an already confusing case. As investigators assessed the scene, one conclusion rapidly gained strength. There was no obvious indication that Maria had chosen to disappear voluntarily. The physical evidence pointed in the opposite direction. The abandoned vehicle alone raised doubts about a voluntary departure. The blood and scattered belongings deepened those doubts considerably. The possibility of an organized abduction began to emerge as a serious investigative theory. Organized abductions differ from spontaneous acts of violence in important ways. They often involve planning, coordination, and preparation. They may involve multiple participants. They frequently leave behind fewer obvious clues because the perpetrators anticipate investigative scrutiny. At this early stage, authorities could not determine whether such an operation had occurred. However, the circumstances encouraged investigators to consider the possibility. The rural setting may have further complicated matters. Agricultural areas often contain large expanses of land, multiple access routes, and relatively few witnesses compared to urban environments. If an abduction occurred, perpetrators may have benefited from isolation and familiarity with the terrain. These factors would later become significant as investigators attempted to reconstruct what happened. Yet during those first stages of the investigation, certainty remained elusive. The evidence suggested violence, but the victim was gone. The scene suggested intervention by another party, but no immediate explanation emerged. For Maria's family, the uncertainty must have been excruciating. Missing person investigations create a unique form of psychological suffering because they deny closure. When a loved one dies and the circumstances are known, grief can begin. Pain remains, but certainty exists. In disappearances, certainty often remains absent. Families find themselves trapped between hope and fear. Every possibility remains alive. Every theory carries emotional consequences. In Maria's case, that uncertainty would persist far longer than anyone initially imagined. Days passed without answers, then weeks. The investigation continued, but Maria remained missing. Search efforts sought signs of her whereabouts. Investigators examined evidence. Theories emerged and evolved. Yet the central question remained unchanged. What happened at the farm on May 6, 2016? As authorities expanded their efforts, another reality became increasingly apparent. The absence of a body represented a major obstacle. In many homicide investigations, physical remains provide investigators with crucial information about cause of death, timing, injuries, and forensic evidence. Without that foundation, investigators must rely more heavily on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and reconstruction. The challenge becomes exponentially more difficult. In the months that followed, this challenge would shape every aspect of the investigation. Authorities searched for evidence capable of explaining Maria's disappearance. They explored multiple motives. They considered various suspects and scenarios. Yet despite extensive efforts, Maria herself remained absent. The missing body gradually became one of the defining characteristics of the case. As time passed, investigators began considering whether the disappearance might fit a pattern known within Italy's long struggle against organized crime. The term lupera bianca refers to murders in which victims are made to disappear completely. The objective is not merely to kill, but to erase. Without a body, proving the crime becomes more difficult. Families are denied closure. Fear spreads throughout communities. The victim vanishes not only physically, but symbolically. At the time of Maria's disappearance, investigators could not yet conclusively apply that label to the case. However, the similarities were impossible to ignore. A woman had vanished. Physical evidence suggested violence. No body had been found. The longer the disappearance continued, the more troubling the comparison became. The unanswered questions surrounding that day continued multiplying. Had Maria been targeted specifically? Had her attackers been waiting for her arrival? Had they known her schedule in advance? Was the crime connected to her business interests, her personal life, her ownership of land, or something else entirely? Each possibility generated further investigative work. Yet answers remained frustratingly out of reach. What investigators knew with certainty was surprisingly limited. Maria arrived at her farm on the morning of May 6, 2016. At some point thereafter, she disappeared. Her SUV remained behind. The door stood open. Personal belongings were scattered nearby. Blood was present. Her mobile phone was missing. Everything beyond those facts required investigation. Everything beyond those facts would take years to uncover. Looking back, the events of that day occupy a strange place within the larger narrative of the case. They represent both the beginning of the mystery and the center of it. Every later discovery would point back to those crucial hours. Every witness statement, arrest, prosecutorial theory, and anti-mafia operation would ultimately attempt to answer the same question investigators first confronted at the farm. What happened to Maria Chindimo after she arrived at work that morning? At the end of that day, nobody knew. The farm stood silent. The vehicle remained where it had been left. The evidence offered hints, but not explanations. Somewhere beyond the boundaries of the crime scene lay the truth. Finding it would require years of investigation, the examination of multiple motives, the scrutiny of organized crime networks, and the cooperation of witnesses who would eventually help reveal what prosecutors believe had happened. But on May 6, 2016, none of that had yet occurred. There was only a missing woman, a deeply troubling crime scene, and a growing realization that this was not a disappearance that would be solved quickly. The search for Maria Chindimo had begun, and with it began a long journey into one of Italy's most disturbing criminal investigations. The answers would not come easily. Some would not come for years. And when they finally emerged, they would reveal allegations so horrifying that they would transform the case from a local disappearance into a national symbol of the brutality associated with organized crime and the destructive power of those determined to silence a woman who insisted on living life on her own terms. When investigators first arrived at the farm near Montalto di Lombardi on May 6, 2016, they were confronted with a crime scene that seemed to tell two stories at once. The physical evidence suggested that something violent had occurred. Yet at the same time, the most important piece of evidence, the victim herself, was missing. Maria Chindimo had vanished. Her vehicle remained behind. Personal belongings lay scattered on the ground. Blood had been discovered. But there was no body, no direct eyewitness account publicly identifying what had happened, and no immediate explanation capable of connecting the available facts into a coherent narrative. In many criminal investigations, the first days are critical. Witnesses are interviewed while memories remain fresh. Physical evidence is collected before it can degrade. Leads are pursued rapidly in hopes of identifying suspects before they have an opportunity to distance themselves from the crime. In Maria's case, investigators immediately recognized that time mattered. Yet they also faced a challenge that would haunt the investigation for years. They were searching not only for a perpetrator, but also for the victim herself. The distinction was important. Before authorities could fully understand how Maria disappeared, they needed to determine where she was. The search began with the assumption that answers might still be found. Investigators examined the property. They attempted to reconstruct the final known movements of Maria's day. They reviewed available evidence from the scene. They sought any indication that might reveal whether she had been taken elsewhere, injured nearby, or subjected to some other form of criminal act. Yet as days turned into weeks, the central mystery remained unchanged. Maria was gone. The absence itself began to take on significance. In many homicide cases, perpetrators attempt to conceal evidence. They may move a body, destroy objects connected to the crime, or create false narratives designed to mislead investigators. Yet even within that context, complete disappearance is unusual. Human beings leave traces behind. Criminal acts leave traces behind. The longer investigators searched without finding Maria, the more concerning the situation became. Eventually, authorities began considering a possibility that would later become central to the case. The disappearance resembled what Italian investigators have historically described as a lupera. Bianca. The phrase carries a chilling meaning within the history of organized crime investigations. Unlike a conventional homicide, where the victim's body is eventually discovered, a lupera bianca involves the deliberate elimination of the body itself. The objective is not simply to kill. The objective is to erase. A victim who cannot be found presents investigators with enormous difficulties. Physical evidence becomes scarce. Timelines become uncertain. Families are denied the opportunity to recover their loved ones. In many ways, the disappearance continues long after the crime itself. For Maria's family, that reality was devastating. Every day without answers created new uncertainty. Every unsuccessful search raised new fears. The absence of a body prevented closure. At the same time, investigators were forced to confront a difficult reality. If Maria had become the victim of a lupera bianca, then someone had likely invested significant effort into ensuring she would never be found. That possibility immediately broadened the scope of the investigation. Authorities began asking not only who might have wanted to harm Maria, but who possessed the resources, motivation, and connections necessary to make a person disappear completely. As investigators explored possible answers, they focused on motive. In any major criminal investigation, understanding motive helps narrow the field of possibilities. It provides context for actions that might otherwise seem incomprehensible. Yet in Maria's case, motive proved unusually complex. There was no single obvious explanation. Instead, investigators identified several potential areas of conflict, each of which required careful examination. One of the first areas of interest involved land ownership. Maria controlled valuable agricultural property. Following her husband's death in 2015, she had assumed increasing responsibility for family assets and farming operations. Agricultural land in Calabria carries significant economic value. Beyond its monetary worth, land can represent influence, opportunity, and long-term strategic importance. Investigators therefore examined whether Maria's ownership and management of these properties could have created tensions with individuals seeking control over those resources. Land-related disputes have historically played important roles in organized crime investigations, particularly in regions where property ownership intersects with broader economic interests. Yet land was only one possibility. Investigators also explored financial and business-related motives. Maria was not merely a landowner. She actively managed agricultural operations. Any business activity creates relationships, obligations, and potential conflicts. Authorities therefore considered whether economic interests connected to her work might explain the crime. At the same time, another area of inquiry emerged. Investigators began examining Maria's personal life. Following the death of her husband, she had begun a new romantic relationship. On the surface, this might appear unrelated to a criminal investigation. Yet prosecutors eventually came to view this aspect of her life as potentially significant. According to their later conclusions, Maria's decision to rebuild her personal life may have challenged expectations held by individuals operating within a deeply patriarchal environment influenced by organized crime. Investigators did not immediately reach this conclusion. Like every other theory, it required years of analysis and evidence gathering. During the early stages of the investigation, authorities could not know which motive would ultimately prove most significant. What they did know was that Maria occupied a position at the intersection of several potentially sensitive issues. She controlled valuable property. She operated a business. She exercised personal independence. Each factor required examination. Yet despite extensive investigative efforts, the case remained frustratingly difficult to solve. The missing body continued to limit the available evidence. The lack of direct witnesses complicated reconstruction of the crime. Months passed, then years. Public attention remained focused on the disappearance, but certainty remained elusive. The investigation continued, often advancing through small discoveries rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Then, in 2019, a significant development occurred. Authorities arrested Salvatore Ascone, a man described as having connections to the 'Ndrangheta, the powerful Calabrian organized crime organization that has long been a focus of anti-mafia investigations. The arrest itself did not immediately solve the case. However, it represented an important shift in the direction of the investigation. Increasingly, authorities were examining the possibility that Maria's disappearance had not been the work of an isolated individual, but rather had connections to broader criminal structures. Around this period, investigators uncovered another important detail. According to the investigation, surveillance camera systems located near the area had been tampered with. The significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. Surveillance cameras exist to document events. When someone interferes with such systems, investigators naturally ask why. Camera tampering suggests preparation. It suggests awareness. It suggests an effort to prevent authorities from obtaining evidence. Most importantly, it suggests planning rather than spontaneity. The discovery strengthened the theory that Maria's disappearance may have been the result of an organized operation rather than a random act of violence. The implications were profound. If the crime had been planned, then someone likely knew Maria's movements. Someone may have anticipated her arrival at the farm. Someone may have taken steps to reduce the risk of detection before the crime even occurred. Such possibilities dramatically changed the way investigators viewed the case. No longer were they simply examining a disappearance. Increasingly, they were investigating what appeared to be a carefully organized criminal act. Yet, even with these developments, major questions remained unanswered. Authorities still lacked a complete reconstruction of events. They still lacked a body. They still needed evidence capable of explaining precisely what had happened after Maria arrived at the farm. The next major breakthrough would emerge through a much larger anti-mafia effort. Over time, investigators expanded their inquiries into broader criminal networks operating within Calabria. These efforts eventually became part of a large-scale anti-mafia operation known as Mistral Carthago. The operation represented a significant law enforcement effort targeting organized crime structures and associated criminal activities. Within that broader investigation, Maria's disappearance remained a key focus. One of the most important developments associated with the operation involved the emergence of cooperating witnesses. Throughout the history of organized crime investigations, witness cooperation has often proven essential. Criminal organizations frequently rely on secrecy, loyalty, and fear to protect themselves from scrutiny. As a result, insider testimony can provide investigators with information that would otherwise remain inaccessible. In the Maria Chindamo investigation, witness cooperation gradually began illuminating areas that had remained hidden for years. Piece by piece, prosecutors assembled a clearer picture of what they believed had occurred. The process was neither immediate nor simple. Information emerged gradually. Investigators compared statements against known evidence. They tested claims against established facts. They sought consistency and corroboration. Over time, a horrifying reconstruction began to take shape. According to the accounts later presented by prosecutors and cooperating witnesses, Maria had been abducted and murdered. This conclusion represented a tragic turning point in the case. For years, uncertainty had remained. The possibility of survival, however remote, had existed. The emerging evidence increasingly suggested that Maria had not survived the events of May 6, 2016. Yet the most disturbing revelations were still to come. According to witness testimony cited by prosecutors, the perpetrators did not stop at murder. They allegedly undertook extraordinary measures to eliminate evidence of the crime. Prosecutors from Catanzaro eventually described a reconstruction so shocking that it attracted international attention. According to the investigative findings, Maria's body was allegedly fed to pigs as part of an effort to destroy evidence and prevent recovery of her remains. The allegations did not end there. Prosecutors further stated that any remaining traces were subsequently destroyed using agricultural machinery, reducing the possibility of identification even further. These allegations offered a possible explanation for the mystery that had haunted investigators. Since the beginning, they explained why no complete body had ever been found. They explained why years of searching had failed to produce the evidence typically associated with homicide investigations. Most importantly, they explained why the case had come to resemble a classic example of Luper Bianca. If the prosecutor's reconstruction was correct, the perpetrators had not merely sought to kill Maria. They had sought to erase her existence from the physical world. Such actions carry significance beyond concealment. They reflect a desire to eliminate evidence so thoroughly that the victim becomes difficult to recover, difficult to identify, and difficult to memorialize. Yet paradoxically, the alleged effort to erase Maria ultimately had the opposite effect. The more investigators uncovered, the more prominent the case became. Public attention intensified. Anti-mafia prosecutors continued pursuing those believed responsible. The disappearance that was allegedly intended to remove a woman from view instead became one of the most discussed criminal cases in modern Calabria. As prosecutors evaluated witness testimony and other evidence, they increasingly concluded that Maria's murder was connected to multiple motives operating simultaneously. Land ownership remained significant. Economic interests remained relevant. Her personal independence remained a central theme. Rather than identifying a single simple explanation, investigators came to view the crime as the product of intersecting factors involving power, control, and influence. By this stage, the investigation had evolved far beyond the abandoned SUV discovered years earlier. What began as a missing person case had become a major anti-mafia inquiry involving allegations of organized planning, evidence concealment, witness cooperation, and the systematic destruction of a victim's remains. Yet despite the progress achieved, one painful reality remained unchanged. Maria herself had never been recovered. The physical absence that defined the first day of the investigation continued defining the case. Years later, investigators had answers where once there had been only questions. Prosecutors had theories supported by evidence and testimony. Suspects had been identified. Arrests had occurred. Yet the family still lacked what so many families seek after violent crime: the opportunity to bring a loved one home. The investigation into Maria Chindamo's disappearance revealed not only the fate prosecutors believed she suffered, but also the extraordinary difficulties involved in pursuing justice when perpetrators attempt to destroy every trace of their victim. It demonstrated the persistence required of investigators facing years of uncertainty. And it exposed a network of motives and relationships far more complex than anyone could have. Imagine when authorities first arrived at a quiet farm in Calabria and discovered a vehicle standing alone beside an open door. The mystery was no longer whether a crime had occurred. The mystery had become how justice could be achieved when those responsible appeared to have devoted such effort to ensuring that the truth would never be found. The answer to that question would emerge in the next phase of the story, as prosecutors transformed years of investigative work into arrests, formal accusations, and official conclusions about who was responsible for the disappearance and death of Maria Chindimo. By the time the investigation into Maria Chindimo's disappearance entered its later stages, one fact had become impossible to ignore. What had begun as a missing person case in the countryside of Calabria was no longer being treated as an isolated mystery. Years of investigative work had transformed the case into something much larger, a complex anti-mafia inquiry involving allegations of organized criminal activity, deliberate evidence destruction, and the targeting of a woman whose independence had placed her at the center of overlapping economic and social tensions. Yet despite the progress investigators had made, one extraordinary challenge remained. There is still no body. In criminal justice systems around the world, homicide prosecutions often rely heavily on physical evidence recovered from a victim's remains. Such evidence can establish cause of death, identify injuries, confirm timelines, and strengthen the overall case against suspects. In Maria's case, investigators were forced to move forward without that foundation. They faced the difficult task of pursuing accountability in a case where the victim had allegedly been made to disappear almost completely. The challenge was not unprecedented, but it was significant. The absence of a body meant that prosecutors needed to construct their case through a combination of physical evidence, investigative findings, witness testimony, and the broader context uncovered during years of inquiry. It required building a narrative capable of explaining not only what happened, but also why so little evidence remained behind. By this stage, prosecutors had developed a theory that differed dramatically from the uncertainty that characterized the early months of the investigation. In 2016, authorities were still asking whether Maria had disappeared voluntarily, been abducted, or become the victim of some unknown crime. Years later, investigators believed they had identified a far more disturbing reality. According to the conclusions presented by anti-mafia prosecutors, Maria had been targeted, abducted, murdered, and subjected to an extraordinary effort aimed at eliminating evidence of the crime. These conclusions emerged gradually. They were not the result of a single confession or a single piece of evidence. Instead, they represented the cumulative effect of years of investigative work. Witness statements, intelligence gathered during anti-mafia operations, examination of local criminal networks, and analysis of the circumstances surrounding Maria's disappearance all contributed to the prosecutorial reconstruction of events. Central to that reconstruction was the belief that Maria's death could not be explained by a simple motive. Prosecutors increasingly viewed the crime as the product of multiple overlapping interests. One of the most important involved land. Throughout the investigation, authorities repeatedly examined the significance of Maria's agricultural properties. Following the death of her husband, Maria had assumed responsibility for valuable land and farming operations. Prosecutors argued that these assets represented more than ordinary property. Within certain criminal environments, control of land can translate into influence, economic opportunity, and strategic advantage. Investigators therefore concluded that ownership issues likely played a role in the events leading to Maria's disappearance. Yet land alone did not fully explain the case. As the investigation progressed, prosecutors increasingly emphasized another theme: control. Specifically, they examined the ways in which Maria's personal independence may have challenged individuals operating within a culture shaped by organized crime and patriarchal expectations. According to investigators, Maria's life after her husband's death became a crucial part of the story. Rather than withdrawing from public life, she assumed responsibility for business operations. Rather than relinquishing control of family assets, she managed them herself. Rather than allowing tragedy to define the remainder of her life, she began rebuilding. One of the most frequently discussed aspects of this rebuilding process involved her new romantic relationship. Prosecutors pointed to the timing of her disappearance and the broader context surrounding her personal life as factors deserving close attention. Their theory suggested that Maria's decision to move forward after becoming a widow was viewed negatively by certain individuals connected to a deeply patriarchal environment. This interpretation transformed the case from a conventional homicide investigation into something with broader social implications. Investigators were no longer examining only questions of property and criminal profit. They were also examining how power can be exercised through control over personal choices. According to prosecutors, Maria's independence itself may have become a source of conflict. The significance of this conclusion was reflected in public statements made by anti-mafia prosecutor Nicola Gratteri, one of Italy's most prominent figures in the fight against organized crime. Gratteri repeatedly emphasized that Maria represented a woman determined to direct her own life. She managed her business. She raised her children. She made her own decisions. In the view of prosecutors, these actions were not incidental details. They were central elements of the motive behind the crime. Such conclusions carried enormous symbolic weight. Criminal investigations often focus narrowly on specific acts and specific perpetrators. Yet Maria's case increasingly came to represent something larger. Prosecutors portrayed her not merely as the victim of violence, but as the victim of an environment in which autonomy itself could provoke hostility. Whether examined through the lens of property ownership, organized crime influence, or gender-based control, the underlying theme remained consistent. Maria was a woman exercising independence in circumstances where certain individuals allegedly found that independence unacceptable, while investigators continued developing their understanding of motive. Broader anti-mafia operations were simultaneously generating new opportunities to identify those responsible. One of the most important developments occurred through Operation Maestro Carthago, a major law enforcement effort targeting criminal organizations and their associates within Calabria. The operation represented years of investigative work directed at dismantling networks believed to be connected to organized criminal activity. Within that larger framework, Maria's disappearance occupied a prominent place. By 2023, authorities announced significant progress. Numerous arrests were carried out as part of the operation. Prosecutors stated that they had substantially clarified the circumstances surrounding Maria's disappearance and death. According to official statements, investigators had identified individuals believed to have participated in various stages of the crime, including the abduction, murder, and disposal of remains. These developments marked a major turning point. For years, Maria's family had lived with uncertainty. The public had watched a mystery unfold without resolution. Investigators had pursued leads through an extraordinarily difficult evidentiary landscape. Now, authorities were publicly asserting that they understood the basic structure of the crime and the identities of those allegedly involved. The importance of this moment cannot be overstated. Organized crime investigations often depend on patience. Networks of secrecy are rarely penetrated quickly. Witnesses may be reluctant to cooperate. Evidence may be concealed or destroyed. Fear can discourage public participation. As a result, meaningful breakthroughs sometimes require years rather than months. The developments associated with Operation Maestro Carthago reflected exactly that kind of long-term investigative effort. Nevertheless, significant limitations remained. Despite arrests, and prosecutorial conclusions. The absence of Maria's remains continued to cast a shadow over the case. Prosecutors believe they understood why the body had never been recovered. Witness testimony and investigative findings had provided a horrifying explanation. Yet understanding why evidence disappeared is not the same as recovering it. The physical absence persisted. For Maria's family, this reality carried profound emotional consequences. Criminal prosecutions can establish accountability. Courts can impose penalties. Official findings can provide answers. But none of these outcomes can replace the recovery of a loved one. Throughout history, families of the disappeared have often described the absence of remains as a unique source of pain. Without recovery, there is no final farewell, no burial, no place where grief can fully settle. Maria's case reflected that painful reality. Even as investigators advanced toward official conclusions, one of the most important forms of closure remained unavailable. Yet from a legal and investigative standpoint, authorities argued that the evidence had reached a point where action was necessary. The years of uncertainty that followed May 6, 2016, had gradually given way to a coherent prosecutorial narrative. According to that narrative, Maria had not simply vanished. She had been targeted. Her disappearance had not been accidental. It had been organized. The destruction of evidence had not been incidental. It had been deliberate. The objective, prosecutors believed, was not only to kill, but also to erase. In many ways, the legal developments associated with the case represented a direct challenge to that objective. The alleged perpetrators had attempted to create a crime without a victim, a murder without a body, an absence so complete that accountability would become impossible. Instead, investigators spent years reconstructing events piece by piece. Through witness cooperation, anti-mafia operations, and persistent investigative work, authorities claimed they had exposed the underlying truth. The symbolism of that achievement resonated far beyond Calabria. Around the world, organized crime organizations often rely on intimidation and secrecy. They depend upon the belief that witnesses will remain silent and that victims can be forgotten. Cases like Maria's test the ability of institutions to confront those tactics. They raise fundamental questions about whether justice can be achieved when evidence has been deliberately destroyed. They challenge investigators to prove crimes that perpetrators believed could never be proven. By 2023, prosecutors were signaling their answer. Despite extraordinary obstacles, they believed the case had been substantially solved. The significance of this conclusion extended beyond the identification of suspects. It represented an assertion that truth could survive even when evidence had been systematically attacked. It represented a declaration that disappearance does not necessarily guarantee impunity. Most importantly, it represented an effort to restore Maria's place within the historical record. The alleged perpetrators may have attempted to eliminate every trace of her. Yet the investigation ensured that her story would not vanish alongside her remains. Instead, her name became known throughout Italy. Her case became a symbol discussed by prosecutors, journalists, anti-mafia activists, and ordinary citizens. In that sense, the effort to erase her ultimately failed. As a legal process continued and authorities advanced their official conclusions, the story of Maria Chindamo evolved into something larger than a criminal prosecution. It became a reflection of broader struggles against organized crime, against intimidation, and against systems of control that seek to determine how individuals live their lives. The legal developments provided answers, but they also raised larger questions about power, freedom, and resistance. Those questions would shape the legacy of the case long after arrests were made and investigative. Milestones were reached. For Maria's family, the legal progress represented movement toward accountability. For investigators, it represented the culmination of years of work. For the broader public, It transformed a disappearance into a symbol. Yet the final chapter of the story is not defined solely by prosecutions or arrests. It is defined by what remained after the investigation, the impact on a family, the lessons drawn by a society, and the enduring legacy of a woman whose determination to live independently ultimately made her one of the most significant symbols in Italy's modern struggle against organized crime. That legacy is where the story now turns. In the aftermath of Maria Cindimo's disappearance, the silence that followed May 6th, 2016 did not simply remain a personal tragedy confined to one family. It gradually evolved into something larger, an absence that reverberated through legal institutions, anti-mafia investigations, public discourse, and the collective consciousness of a country long familiar with the presence of organized crime. Over time, Maria was no longer discussed only as a missing woman from Calabria. She became a symbol, and like many symbols born from tragedy, her meaning expanded beyond the original facts of the case. Yet at the center of that symbolism remained a very simple human reality. A mother of 3 children never returned home, and a life that was interrupted without farewell or certainty. For her family, the consequences of her disappearance were not abstract. They were immediate and enduring. The disappearance of a loved one without a body creates a form of grief that does not follow a natural conclusion. There is no confirmed death, no funeral, no grave, no final moment of recognition that allows mourning to fully take shape. Instead, families are left in a suspended state between hope and loss. Each passing day carries the same unanswered question, and each unanswered question prevents emotional closure. In Maria's case, this uncertainty stretched across years, during which investigators worked while her children and relatives lived with a reality defined by absence. Even as prosecutors later stated they believe she had been abducted and killed, the absence of physical remains meant that a deeply human part of the tragedy remained unresolved. Beyond the personal dimension, Maria's case took on broader significance within Italy's long and difficult struggle against organized crime, particularly the Calabrian Mafia, known as the 'Ndrangheta. The organization has been the subject of extensive investigations for decades, and its influence has been widely documented by law enforcement agencies and prosecutors. Within that context, Maria's disappearance became more than an individual case. It was interpreted as part of a larger pattern of violence and control that investigators have repeatedly sought to expose and dismantle. In public discussions, her case was often cited alongside other incidents in which individuals appear to have been targeted not only for economic reasons, but also for reasons tied to influence, intimidation, and social control. Prosecutors and anti-mafia figures emphasize that organized crime does not operate solely through financial power or direct violence, but also through its ability to shape behavior within communities. Fear, silence, and conformity can become tools as powerful as weapons. Against this backdrop, Maria Cindimo's story acquired symbolic weight. She was described not only as a victim of a crime, but as a woman who represented resistance to the pressures of that environment. Her management of agricultural land, her assumption of responsibility after her husband's death, and her decision to rebuild her personal life were all later interpreted as acts of independence in a setting where independence itself could be viewed as defiance. Whether or not Maria ever perceived her actions in those terms is ultimately unknown. What is clear from the investigative perspective is how those actions were later understood within the framework of the case. Prosecutors, including anti-mafia magistrates such as Nicola Gratteri, framed her story as emblematic of a broader struggle faced by women in environments influenced by patriarchal and criminal structures. In their interpretation, Maria's disappearance was not only about land or economic interest, but also about control, control over property, control over behavior, and control over personal autonomy. This interpretation does not simplify the case. Rather, it deepens it. It suggests that the violence attributed to those responsible was not random, but embedded within a system of expectations and power relations that extend beyond individual motives. Yet even with this broader understanding, the core tragedy remains unchanged. A woman left for work and never returned. A family lost a mother. A community was confronted with a disappearance that resisted immediate explanation. As investigations progressed, and Operation Maestral Carthago led to arrests and official conclusions, the legal system moved closer to assigning responsibility. Prosecutors stated that they had identified individuals allegedly involved in the abduction, killing, and concealment of Maria's remains. These developments provided structure to what had once been an open-ended mystery. They allowed the case to move from uncertainty toward a form of legal resolution. However, legal resolution and emotional resolution are not the same. For Maria's family, the most important absence remained physical. Without her remains, the possibility of burial and farewell remains out of reach. The law can establish accountability, but it cannot replace what was taken. This distinction is one of the most painful realities in cases of enforced disappearance. Even when perpetrators are identified and prosecuted, the absence of a body continues to define the experience of those left behind. In this sense, Maria's case reflects a broader, global phenomenon. Across many countries, cases involving disappearance without recovery illustrate the limits of justice when physical evidence is destroyed or concealed. Investigators can reconstruct events, prosecutors can present cases, and courts can deliver verdicts. But families remain suspended between legal closure and personal loss. The tension between these two forms of truth is one of the defining features of such cases. Over time, Maria's story also became part of a wider public conversation in Italy about women's autonomy, violence, and the social structures that can enable or conceal abuse. Her case was not isolated in its themes. It intersected with ongoing debates about gender-based violence, economic control, and the influence of organized crime in certain regions. Within these discussions, Maria was increasingly portrayed not only as a victim of a specific crime, but as a representation of broader societal challenges. Her independence, particularly after the death of her husband, became a focal point for interpretation. She managed land. She ran a business. She made personal decisions about her future, in a narrative constructed by investigators and commentators. These actions came to symbolize a form of resistance that was ultimately met with lethal force. Yet it is important to recognize that symbolism does not replace individuality. Behind every interpretation remains a specific human life with its own complexity, motivations, and private experiences that are not fully accessible through legal documents or investigative summaries. Maria Chindimo was not a concept. She was a person navigating grief, responsibility, and daily life in a specific place and time. The transformation of her story into a symbol is a reflection of how societies process tragedy. But it should not obscure the reality of her individuality. In the years following the investigation, the case continued to be referenced in discussions of anti-mafia efforts and judicial persistence. It demonstrated the long-term nature of organized crime investigations and the importance of sustained institutional attention. It also highlighted the role of witness cooperation in breaking through systems of silence that can otherwise obstruct justice for years. Without such cooperation, many of the conclusions later reached by prosecutors may never have emerged. At the same time, the case underscores the limitations that remain even in successful investigations. Despite arrests and official findings, the physical absence of Maria remains unresolved. That absence continues to define the emotional landscape of the case more than any legal outcome. Ultimately, the legacy of Maria Chindamo is shaped by two parallel truths. The first is that she became the subject of a major criminal investigation that exposed alleged networks of violence, control, and organized crime influence. The second is that she remains a missing woman whose final resting place is still unknown. These two realities exist side by side, never fully reconciling the distance between legal understanding and human absence. In the quiet fields of Calabria, where her journey ended and her disappearance began, the landscape remains largely unchanged. The same agricultural land continues to exist. The same rural roads continue to be traveled. Life continues in the region that formed the backdrop to her story. Yet within that ordinary continuity lies an extraordinary absence. A vehicle once stood in a field. A door once remained open. A life once stopped without warning. And even as investigations have advanced and conclusions have been drawn, that moment remains unresolved in the most human sense. Maria Chindamo's story does not end with the identification of suspects or the articulation of motive. It ends and continues simultaneously in the unanswered space she left behind. She is remembered not only because of what was done to her, but because of what her case represents: the fragility of safety, the consequences of control, and the enduring struggle to ensure that disappearance does not mean erasure. In that sense, the investigation achieved something her alleged perpetrators sought to prevent. It ensured that Maria was not forgotten. Her name remains in legal records, in investigative files, in public memory, and in ongoing discussions about justice and organized crime. The attempt to erase her physically did not erase her from history. Instead, it fixed her place within it. And that is the final paradox of the case. An effort to make a woman disappear ultimately made her story impossible to ignore. Some cases do not truly end when investigators announce conclusions, or when prosecutors present reconstructed narratives, or even when courts begin assigning legal responsibility. Some cases continue to exist in a different form, no longer as active investigations, but as unresolved emotional and social spaces that remain open long after official milestones are reached. The disappearance of Maria Chindamo belongs to this category. Even after years of investigation, arrests, witness testimony, and prosecutorial findings, the case does not settle into a final point. Instead, it remains suspended between what has been established legally and what can never be fully restored in human terms. Maria's story is not only about what happened on May 6th, 2016, but also about everything that continued afterward: the absence, the interpretation, and the meaning imposed on a life that was interrupted without warning and without return. In a legal sense, the case moved forward. Investigators built a framework of events based on physical evidence, witness statements, and broader anti-mafia operations. Prosecutors later articulated a theory in which Maria was abducted, killed, and her remains deliberately destroyed in an attempt to prevent recovery and obstruct justice. Arrests were made. Charges were prepared. The investigation became part of a larger judicial effort targeting organized criminal networks in Calabria. From the perspective of law enforcement, this progression represented success, a transformation of uncertainty into structured accountability. Yet even in systems designed to produce clarity, certain cases resist complete resolution. The absence of Maria's body remains the most defining feature of the entire story. It is not simply an investigative detail. It is the central void around which every other element of the case revolves. Without physical remains, there is no place of mourning, no final point of reference, no tangible boundary between the world of the living and the reality of death. For her family, this absence defines the experience more than any legal conclusion ever could. The law can declare what it believes happened. It can assign responsibility. It can document and archive and prosecute. But it cannot restore what was taken. And it cannot replace the human need for closure through physical presence and farewell. This gap between legal truth and human grief is one of the most profound dimensions of disappearance. Cases. Maria's case also continues to exist within a broader social context that extends beyond the courtroom. It has become part of ongoing discussions in Italy about organized crime, particularly the influence of the 'Ndrangheta in certain regions, and the ways in which power can manifest not only through financial control, but also through social pressure and intimidation. In these discussions, Maria is often referenced as an example of how deeply personal choices, property ownership, economic independence, and family decisions can become entangled with broader systems of power. Her life, as reconstructed through the investigation, is frequently used to illustrate how ordinary acts of independence can acquire unintended significance in environments shaped by a long-standing criminal influence. Yet even as her case is used to represent larger themes, it is important to recognize the limitation of any symbolic interpretation. Symbols simplify. Human lives do not. Maria was not a concept or an abstract example of resistance. She was a person living a specific life, making decisions within a specific set of circumstances, and navigating personal responsibilities that included raising children and managing a farm. The transformation of her story into a symbol of resistance against organized crime reflects the way societies attempt to make sense of violence. But it does not fully contain the reality of who she was. There is also a temporal dimension to cases like this that is often overlooked. Time does not stop when a person disappears. Investigations continue. Legal systems proceed. Public attention shifts. But for families, time becomes fragmented. There is a before defined by normal life, and an after defined by absence. The space between those two states does not close easily, even when answers begin to emerge. In Maria's case, the after has now extended across years, and each passing year reinforces the permanence of her absence rather than diminishing its impact. Within the investigative narrative, the case demonstrates the gradual nature of truth-seeking in complex criminal environments. It illustrates how initial uncertainty can evolve into structured hypotheses only through sustained effort, cooperation from witnesses, and large-scale operations targeting criminal networks. It also demonstrates how organized crime investigations often require long timelines, during which early theories are repeatedly revised, refined, or replaced entirely as new information becomes available. The progression from an unexplained disappearance to a reconstructed sequence of events attributed to organized actors reflects the layered nature of such investigations. Nothing in the case emerged fully formed. Each stage built upon the previous one, often slowly, sometimes painfully, and always under conditions of incomplete information. Yet even this structured investigative progress cannot fully resolve the emotional reality of what occurred. The disappearance of a person is not only a legal problem. It is a rupture in the lives of those connected to them. That rupture does not heal simply because explanations are provided. It changes shape, but it does not disappear. In Maria's case, the rural landscape of Calabria remains an important, if silent, part of the story. The fields, roads, and agricultural land where she lived and worked continue to exist, largely unchanged in their physical form. Yet for those who know her story, those places carry an additional layer of meaning. They're no longer just geographic locations. They're sites of absence. A farm where a vehicle remained. A field where a door was left open. A region where a routine day became the beginning of a disappearance that would echo far beyond its borders. This layering of meaning over ordinary space is one of the ways unresolved cases continue to shape the world around them. Places retain their physical reality, but they also acquire memory, interpretation, and narrative weight. Over time, Maria's name has become inseparable from discussions about violence, autonomy, and the risks faced by individuals who find themselves at the intersection of personal independence and organized systems of power. Her story is referenced not because it is unique in its tragedy, but because it reflects patterns that have appeared in other cases, both within Italy and beyond. It speaks to broader concerns about how authority can be exerted outside formal institutions, and how silence can be enforced not only through direct threats, but also through structural influence. At the same time, the case also highlights the persistence of investigative institutions in pursuing accountability over long periods. The eventual arrests and prosecutorial findings demonstrate that even in environments where organized crime has historically exerted influence, law enforcement efforts can still produce results through sustained pressure and coordination. The complexity of the investigation reflects both the difficulty of confronting such networks and the determination required to do so. Yet perhaps the most enduring aspect of Maria's story is not found in legal documents, prosecutorial statements, or investigative summaries. It is found in the absence that remains unresolved despite them. There is a fundamental difference between knowing what likely happened and being able to reconcile that knowledge emotionally. The former belongs to the realm of investigation. The latter belongs to the realm of human experience. Maria's case occupies the space between these two domains. It is both resolved and unresolved, both explained and unhealed. As time continues to pass, the case will likely remain part of Italy's broader historical record of anti-mafia investigations and enforced disappearances. It will be cited in discussions about organized crime, judicial persistence, and the protection of personal autonomy, but will also remain, at its core, a story about absence. A reminder that behind every case file is a life that was interrupted and a group of people who continue to live with that interruption. The final reflection offered by cases like this is not a conclusion in the traditional sense. It is an awareness of what remains when all procedural steps have been completed. Even after investigations end, even after courts act, even after narratives are constructed, there are still spaces that cannot be filled by information alone. Maria Chindamo's story ends, in the official sense, with investigative findings and legal action. But it continues in memory, in meaning, in the unanswered space left behind. And it is within that space, quiet, unresolved, and persistent, that the true weight of her absence is still felt.